This video is sponsored by Audible. So like most people, I prefer not to be left alone with my thoughts, be it while I'm on my way to run errands or when I'm at home exercising or cleaning up. Sure, I could throw on some mindless background noise, but instead, I like to listen to something more engaging, and that's where Audible comes in. Audible is your one-stop shop for spoken word entertainment with an endless selection of audiobooks, podcasts, original celebrity content, meditations, and more. One thing I really love about Audible is that each month I get a credit to use on whatever title I like out of the entire premium selection, and on top of that there's also their Plus catalog that features additional content free to members to download and stream at any time, no credits required. Now, having said that, you might not know where to start, so I'm going to recommend Will My Cat Eat My Eyeballs by Caitlin Doty if you want something morbid but still educational and lighthearted. You can get this title for free today with a free 30-day trial of Audible. All you have to do to take advantage of this deal is to head over to audible.com/ReignBot or text ReignBot to 500-500. Again, that's audible.com/ReignBot or just text ReignBot to 500-500. These days, we're more connected than ever. When most people say that, they're usually referring to things like phones or the internet, but if you think about it, pandemic aside, physical travel has also made massive strides, now being easier and, most importantly, safer than it's ever been, or at least that's what we'd like to tell ourselves. Don't get me wrong, that is exactly how it should be. Safety should always come first. We trust the systems at play to function as intended. Tonight, we discuss an incident that illustrates what happens when said trust is betrayed, when greed outweighs morality. This is the story of the Sewol Ferry disaster. On April 15th of 2014, at approximately 9 p.m., the MV Sewol Ferry departed from South Korea's Incheon port with a final destination of Jeju Island just south of the mainland. On board that day were 476 individuals, 325 of them being high school students on their way to the island for a field trip. Not one of these people had any reason to doubt their safety. After all, this was just a ferry ride. Not exactly something most people would think of as especially scary. The route was routine, and things began as they probably did thousands of times before. The students laughed and joked around while waiting to depart, and likely continued to do so well into the night. The next morning, things still seemed to be going along as they should. The passengers were getting ready for their day and being served breakfast, but it was at this point that any and all normalcy would come to an abrupt end. In Crossroads, a documentary about the incident, a survivor by the name of Sung Moo Kim describes a sudden shudder, followed by the horrifying realization that the vessel was tilting to one side. This was at approximately 8:49 a.m., and almost immediately, the passengers began calling emergency lines for help. This all while being told to stay calm and stay put. And that's what the majority of them did. Outright panic didn't immediately set in. At first, a lot of the students joked around about what was going on, some visibly doing so as a coping mechanism. Others expressed skepticism, confusion, and disbelief. They were told to wait, watching minutes fly by while being keenly aware that time was most likely not on their side.
아 기울어졌어. 야 나 좀 살려줘.
굉장히 자리에서 움직이지 마시고 안전으로 자꾸 대기해 주시기 바랍니다.
진짜 침수는 거. 야 쏠리는 거 장난 아니야. 여기 좀 쏠려. 야. 아 내리고 싶어 진짜 진심이야.
You're probably wondering right now, if a ship is tilting, then it isn't like it's going to magically correct itself. So why aren't these kids being told to at least prepare for an evacuation? The answer, in short, is bureaucracy and astonishing incompetence at the hands of local officials. After ordering all passengers to stay put, frantic communications began taking place behind the scenes, specifically between the Sewol and various government agencies, including Jindo Vessel Traffic Services, the Coast Guard, and even the Presidential Crisis Situation Room. At 9:10 a.m., 20 minutes into the incident, the Sewol's captain told traffic services, quote, "All of us are off our feet now. I don't know whether I should order everyone to jump in the water or not." This quote would prove to be hauntingly emblematic of the problems that plague the rescue effort, with none of those involved willing to take responsibility or make a definitive call on the best course of action. By 9:17 a.m., the crew had been instructed to wear life jackets, be on standby, and had gathered at the bridge, and this appears to be where they stayed for the remainder of their time aboard the Sewol, right up until they were rescued. At 9:25 a.m., traffic services told the Sewol crew, quote, "The escape call should be made on the captain's judgment," and they also asserted that said call should be made immediately, but no such decision was made and the passengers remained in the dark. Soon after, the president's office began its rather bizarre habit of pestering the Coast Guard for a live video feed of the ship, seemingly entirely unwilling to take action without it.
엄마 사랑해요. 아빠 사랑해요. 둘 다 사랑해요.
우리 김영일 씨 아들이 고맙니다. 이번 일로 죽을 수 있을 것 같으니. 야, 계단에 있는 얘들이 제일 무서워. 엄마 아빠 사랑해요. 영원아.
At 9:35 a.m., the first and only Coast Guard vessel that would attend arrived at the scene, Patrol Boat 123. When relaying information to the Coast Guard's HQ security manager, 123 explained that there were no passengers on deck, which seemed to come as a shock to headquarters. It seemed like nonsense because it was, but what would happen next was unthinkable. A little over 10 minutes later, at 9:47, Lee Jun-suk, captain of the Sewol, was rescued by Patrol Boat 123. Not only was he abandoning ship, but he was also abandoning every single passenger he was meant to protect. Keep in mind, he still hadn't provided these people with instructions on what to do in this emergency situation. According to the New Yorker, although the captain had abandoned ship at this point, rather than intensifying the rescue operation, government agencies carried on requesting that a camera be sent to the scene, quote, for their internal reporting, and at around 9:54, a helicopter finally reached the Sewol and began filming the disaster, but even this wasn't enough to spur greater action, and even worse, by this point the ship was almost completely on its side. Survivor Kim Sung-muk, who we mentioned earlier, told the New Yorker that by this point he did notice the chopper along with the Coast Guard, but neither of them made an evacuation call or provided instructions on what to do. Over the next several minutes, the Sewol would continue to sink, and the president would continue asking for live footage. Some passengers who decided not to listen to the captain's initial commands to stay put had so far survived and were being rescued by Patrol Boat 123 and a number of fishing vessels that had stepped in to lend a hand. All of this, though, was too little too late. By 10:25, the Sewol was basically completely gone, almost entirely swallowed up by the sea, and ironically, that's when the president's office, via the Coast Guard, finally issued a command that didn't involve video streaming. First, make sure to have no casualties, they said. Make sure no one is missing in the ferry by scouring the cabins in the engine room. Other calls between different agencies at this time asserted things such as, quote, "We need to get someone to get on the ferry and make a decision to evacuate the passengers in an orderly fashion. People should be told to move on deck and jump out of the ship." Another asked if air rescue could simply land on the ferry. Again, by this point, the ship was completely underwater. For whatever reason, in a call between the Coast Guard and air rescue, it was said that the majority of passengers had been saved, and that almost no one remained in the ferry, which of course was entirely untrue. In the end, over 300 people were still in that ship and would ultimately perish. In spite of frequent correspondence with the president's office, it would not be until that evening, more than 7 hours after the Sewol sank, that President Park became involved in the matter, saying, quote, "I think we have to certify if the passengers are alive or not before sunset," making it painfully apparent just how uninformed she really was. Needless to say, it was clear that the aftermath of all this was going to be just as disorganized and insulting as the incident itself. In the days following following the disaster, the rescue efforts were far from ideal. Jun Guangjun, one of the several civilian divers who arrived the next day to offer assistance, described the Coast Guard's diving equipment as decrepit and warned them that their gear would likely give out before they could rescue anyone. In response to this, a member of the Coast Guard is alleged to have told them that they, quote, needed to pump air into the ship because the president was watching. According to Guangjun, this was all for show, and what the Coast Guard diver actually did was attach the air hose to the outside of the ship in order to maintain appearances. He went on to explain that once air began flowing through this improperly attached hose, what little of the Sewol remained above waves began to sink, and the ship submerged entirely by April 19th. Following this, the rescue mission became a recovery operation, one left in the hands of civilian divers, as no government divers were skilled enough to reach the 40-meter depth. In the initial period, these civilians were recovering an average of 30 bodies per day, and on one occasion found the remains of 48 people in a single room. As you can imagine, this was a harrowing ordeal for the divers themselves, and for the families anxiously awaiting the recovery of their loved ones. It's no surprise that this incident, along with the government's poor response, sparked national outrage that in many ways lasts to this day. Protests erupted, and the Sewol deaths became a major talking point during the later impeachment of President Park, who was ultimately removed from her position. This could actually be a video all on its own, so I highly recommend you look more into it if you're interested. But with that said, President Park may have been the overarching symbol of the system that failed, but who else was to blame for the loss of over 300 young lives? The answer is somewhat complicated. It's clear that a lack of decisive action on the part of the would-be rescuers and the government organizations responding to the crisis led to a far greater loss of life. Responsibility, of course, lies with the captain too, who was quick to abandon his duties to save his own skin, with little thought for the passengers his negligence left in peril. What we haven't covered yet, though, is why the Sewol found itself in need of rescue in the first place. Ships tend to sail all the time without incident, so what made this routine journey so tragically different? There were a few factors at play that likely doomed the Sewol before it ever set sail. Firstly, unsafe renovations had recently been carried out that made the ship less stable and therefore more dangerous. Extra structures were added that made the vessel so top-heavy that dock workers spoke of the ship swaying badly when they would load or unload its cargo. These renovations, as you can expect, made the ship more profitable even if they jeopardized safety. In fact, on the day the ferry sank, it had been massively overburdened, with twice the allowable limit of cargo. Not only was there far too much on board, but crew members had also failed to secure much of it properly, with some of the trucks and containers having been tied down with ropes rather than chains, or having not been secured at all. And finally, to hide their flouting of regulations, the crew of the Sewol had also drained most of its ballast water so that the overburdened ship wouldn't sit too low with all the additional weight. This allowed for the Sewol to pass the frankly lazy inspections carried out before it left port. Some in the shipping industry have admitted that often a glance at the water level was as far as checks went, when even a quick look aboard that day could have easily proven that the ferry was not fit to sail. All of these elements combined meant that when the ship turned sharply while en route to its destination, it being top-heavy made it lean, and the poorly secured cargo ensured that the Sewol would not be able to recover. Truly then, the blame for the Sewol tragedy is shared, and though much has happened in the time since, for the parents and the divers so deeply impacted, justice is yet to be served. Though the captain was given a life sentence for murder in late 2014, and other crew members were given lesser sentences around that same time, the politician and bureaucrats whose negligence led to the botched rescue have never been held accountable in any meaningful way. Likewise, the Korean shipping industry, who up until the disaster allowed a firm run by lobbyists to handle its safety inspections, by the way, is still finding ways to bypass the rules and put profit before safety, with Coast Guard investigators having discovered that weight certificates that have since become required are being fabricated in large numbers, and that some truck drivers are loading extra cargo after having been weighed in. Like I said at the start of all this, we trust things like ships and planes to operate as planned, and in most cases they absolutely do. What we don't expect, however, is for shady individuals to not put our safety first. And even more so, we don't expect the people we trust, the people that we elect, to not show up when we need them. But anyway, guys, before we leave, I just want to say that, as I mentioned earlier, there was a lot that we had to leave out here because this was such a massive story. But if you want to dive deeper, I definitely suggest watching either the New Yorker's coverage of this or the Crossroads documentary mentioned earlier. This video was edited by Darkfire Productions and written/researched by Lux Noctis, with additional editing and writing by yours truly. Special thanks goes to every single one of my lovely supporters on Patreon, but especially these people. T. Gorman, Connor H, Base of Shadow, WH, Anthony, Jamie P, Dimitri L, Millie B, Zweich Alice, Ronnie, TBF, Saul A, Mishi, did I say that right? Guilty Pleasures, Corey Barks, Corky Barks. I've been saying your name wrong for a long time, have I not? David G, Catherine L, KMBK Ketchup, PD Gun, Astro, Tyler T, Bloody the Elf, Andrew L, Espernix, Sean the CHB, Eric M, Brandon F, LC, Daniel G, AJ Runaway, Ulysses, The Deck of Cards, Daniel P, Panda Tiger, The Man in the Crowd, what a name, Deja, Echo Steel, Clifford S, Mega Brutal, S Christine, Eddie, Terry the Outlaw, Penstift, Kyle R, Chris R, Bathtime Duck, Zimbledorf the Calzone Consumer, Rye S, Francisco B, Skygrinder, Elon Musk, I know that this is the guy who used to have the Mitt Romney name, but he changed it, I think. Luck B, Scorian S, Nick B, Melody S, PC, Zippo, Keith Z, Matt J, James M, and Zerai. Again, thank you guys so much, and if you're still listening right now, you're insane, but I love you. I'll see you guys next time.